Dementia Researcher Salon in the Dementia Researcher community. I'm Adam Smith. I'm the Program Director for Dementia Researcher, and it's my pleasure to be hosting our last Salon session of 2024. And today we're going to be talking about PhDing as a mature student. I think my inspiration behind coming up with this topic, it wasn't just mine, it was suggested by audience, was this idea that PhDs aren't just something that young people do when they finish university. This is something that can come in at any time of your life, whether you're in the middle of your job or even later in life. And what we're hopefully going to do today is to hear from two people that started a PhD later in life to talk about their experience of doing that, what they've gained from it, and also as well, hopefully answer some questions for anybody who might be inspired to do the same and follow in their footsteps, or who is thinking about doing that and the practicalities around it. So let me introduce my guest. First of all, we have Dr. James Watson, who is a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Liverpool. He is interested in dementia care, inequalities in health outcomes, care access, ongoing support for people living with dementia and unpaid carers, and has a background of working in the NHS. Like me, I worked in the NHS too. Also joining us is Ellice Parkinson, who's just finishing up her PhD. We were just off camera slightly before we started. We were just talking about the potential that she might receive her PhD revisions just before Christmas. We want to hear if you get those. So Ellice has just had a Viva and finished up her PhD at the University of East Anglia and is now working at Health Innovation East. Ellice explored how people living with dementia consume drinks in care homes. Within two studies, she did the D-drink. Is that right? Am I remembering that study? And all kinds of amazing work on hydration. And if you want to know more specifically about Ellice's work, we actually did we do a podcast? We did a podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
It was a podcast, not a webinar. We did a podcast on this, so I'll post a link while we're chatting away. So we're going to hear from Ellice, and we're going to talk about their experiences, why they did this, what they went through, and then we'll have a chance for you to ask your questions, which you can post at any time using the Q&A function in the chat as well. And for the first time ever on a Salon session, I've been pre-sent some questions from people who were unable to make it today. So we'll make sure we get to those questions as well. But for now, that's enough from me. I think James is going to go first. So if you'd like to share your screen, James. Yes. This worked in rehearsals.
Yeah, the tricky business of actually doing the techie bit.
Let's see if it works in real life.
Does that work?
Yes, that's worked perfectly. Thank you, James. Over to you.
Perfect. So, as Adam mentioned, I'm James from the University of Liverpool. I graduated with my PhD in the summer of 2023. I've been working on a few projects since with the Applied Research Collaboration Northwest Coast, supporting research capacity building within the social care workforce and enhancing evidence-based knowledge and information exchange between stakeholders in social care. I was a quote-unquote mature student, and now I'm currently quote-unquote mature postdoctoral researcher. My PhD looked at socioeconomic, demographic and geographic inequalities in healthcare use and mortality risk among people diagnosed with dementia in England, and also the impact that patterns in healthcare use following diagnosis had on subsequent mortality risk. So I'm going to talk a bit around the differences I noticed, what I picked up during my PhD and the different things that might impact on whether someone's able to do a PhD, how accessible or inaccessible it can be, depending on your circumstances, and kind of the pros and cons of it. So based on my experiences, having done my PhD alongside a group of peers, ranging from those who went straight from undergrad and master's courses to the PhD, and others who'd been in employment and returned to academia like myself, I'd say that age isn't necessarily the important factor in itself. It's all dependent on circumstances. I know plenty of people who were younger than I was and didn't complete their PhD for whatever reason, whether they realised the benefits of employment midway through the PhD or didn't enjoy the research as much as they thought they would. I also know plenty of PhDs who started who were a similar age to me, who had family commitments which were amplified during COVID and had to take a break or give up their PhD entirely. So I'd say, although age can be a factor, it's not necessarily a factor within itself. It's more to do with, say, family circumstances, financial responsibility, and whether the person's got any dependents or caring responsibilities that can also obviously have an impact. And that's not just related to whether someone can do a PhD, but also whether they can do it part-time or full-time, how much effort they can put in, and how much time they can devote towards a PhD. So although PhDs will experience PhDs very differently depending on the circumstances, and I think that's kind of something we need to be more aware of in academia, in that bit of flexibility around PhDs, and particularly for mature students with commitments as well. So I really enjoyed my PhD, and I was incredibly lucky that I've got a really supportive partner. During that time, I had a really supportive employer, and so I kind of had the circumstances that allowed me to do my PhD to the best of my ability. At that time, I'd worked in the NHS for nearly a decade and local authority for several years, and my previous employer supported me to complete my Masters in Public Health. And I realised that's the kind of backing that can be quite rare. However, there are pros and cons to do a PhD generally, some of which are more specific to older PhDs who may have more employment experience. Being used to employment, I was able to kind of quickly understand the culture of the workplace, adapt to manage my own time, and I think managing your own time and work is something that's kind of integral as a PhD because you are given that bit of freedom. However, doing a PhD does kind of make you an expert in a very specific topic. And so meeting specialists in the area of research and practice helps you to learn a great deal from other people, which is something that may be younger PhDs may be better at because they're used to that process of academics and learning, whereas I suppose you can get a bit stuck in your ways. If you come from a workplace, you're kind of like, oh, this is how things are done. We kind of keep on that. So like I mentioned earlier, there can be a lot of factors to contend with, often because it may not necessarily feel like employment or that you are a staff member, even though you may be receiving a monthly stipend. It's knowing that you're allowed to take breaks, allowed to take leave, and understanding that you're not expected to work every minute of every day. I think being an older PhD was good for me as it helped me to switch between my PhD and my normal life relatively easy sometimes. Though as the pressure ramps up towards the end of a PhD, I think everybody experiences that stress that comes with trying to finish the PhD. I'm not trying to generalize it, as it may not always be the case, but maybe young PhDs have gone straight through academia from undergraduate to master's to PhD and maybe used to working through the night or maybe have different patterns for their work. And so I think I benefited from having that very distinct background of I work during the day, that's when work expect me to work, and then I have my life outside of that. So although with 5 days a week of PhD and 1 day a week in public health work, it did mean I could sometimes struggle to have time for myself. So I was either coming home from a PhD and working 2 nights a week or working on a Saturday or a Sunday. So it is a balancing act. But I do think during that time, I did as well as I could, and knowing how to organize my time was a big help in making sure I could kind of decompress from the PhD and my work. So kind of, is it worth it? Again, very dependent on the individual. Like I mentioned earlier, age, both being younger or older, isn't necessarily a barrier to doing a PhD. I think a person's circumstances and the support they've got and the responsibilities can be those deciding factors. It's important to understand whether you can undertake a PhD, and if so, whether it's part-time, full-time, and how much time you can devote to it. Also understanding what you want to take from a PhD, because it is a reciprocal process. You are there to help them as much as they are you. And what you want to do PhD, post-PhD, what kind of route you want to go down as to whether that is the most appropriate for you. So if you want to be a researcher, there is potentially more precarity in being a postdoctoral researcher than there is during your PhD, to be honest. With shorter term contracts for researchers tending to be the norm for early career researchers post-PhD. It's not something you want to throw yourself into, I would imagine, particularly if you're a mature PhD with other commitments. So understanding what's possible within your life and the circumstances, and also having a topic you're interested in and keeps you motivated is kind of invaluable. So I had a really good experience with my PhD. There were ups and downs, but overall I enjoyed it and have continued in research. But I do know that PhDs in academia aren't necessarily for everyone, and that not everybody has the time or the situation that can allow them to do it. So I suppose it's thinking about what is important for you, what you want to get out of it, and also trying to find that institution or supervisory team who can support that in whatever form that kind of takes. So those are kind of my thoughts. So I'll stop sharing my screen now if I can. There you go.
Thank you, James. Actually, you perfectly timed that at the end to lead into my first question, the first question we received on offline. And I went away and I kind of, so you can answer this too. I'm interested to know. So the person asked, they said that they are semi-retired and they're thinking about doing a PhD. They've cared for their wife who lives with dementia. They're thinking about doing a PhD and they were wondered about what does it cost? And how might they go about it? I'm interested to ask, how was your PhD funded, James?
So I applied for it in the way you would apply for a job. So it was a studentship. So there was a very set topic already, and the proposal had already gone in. I applied for it, went through an interview, and was lucky enough to get it. And then I received a monthly stipend for the 3.5 years I conducted it. So it wasn't as much as my wage, but it was tax-free, which kind of balanced it out really. And
Yeah,
there's loads of different methods to doing a PhD. I think a lot of people go to a supervisor in that sense.
what about you, Ellice?
Yeah, so mine was very similar to James. So my PhD, I applied, had an interview with a panel, was successful. I received a PhD stipend co-funded by UEA, as well as the ARC East of England and CCG at the time. And so, yes, I received that monthly for 3 years. In the final year, you don't receive anything. And so quite often people are working, teaching or doing fixed term contracts. And I think each institution is different, but it's useful to know that, as James mentioned, it's tax free, but also you can do extra work at the university. So quite often, say 6 to 10 hours a week additional work. So it's not an enormous salary, but it's certainly enough to get by. And actually the stipends have gone up over the past couple of years in line with cost of living crisis. A lot of the funders have put theirs up.
I think in this, yeah. So actually, I kind of put some thought into this beforehand and wrote out a list of all the ways. So as far as I'm aware now, there could be other ways to fund a PhD because there seems to be so many different ways that people go about this. So commonly, yes, supervisors who have a project in mind will find funding from somewhere, either from their institution or from a charity, and then they will essentially advertise a ready-made funded PhD, and the project is usually predetermined. That isn't to say there isn't some flexibility within there for you to make that your own, particularly I think if it's a good supervisor who wants you to develop the topic. But that's one way to go about it. And as an example, right now, Alzheimer's Society just funded 3 doctoral training centres, which are going to fund 85 PhD students over the next 5 years. And on our website right now, there are something like 15 funded PhD ready-made predetermined projects positions advertised right now, and they're across the country. I think there's something like 6 of them on dementia care related topics and health inequalities and things like that, and then there are a bunch as well on vascular dementia, which is more on the fundamental science side of things, and then there are some on Lewy body dementia as well, which are crossing borders. There's some clinical, some on care. We've just advertised a one today, which is at UCL, and so they're ready-made. So you apply for that and they're funding. And I think the UK stipend at the moment is, I think from next year it's 20,500 a year, and it's I know these ones certainly from Alzheimer's Society are going to go up by about £1,000 a year in terms of stipend. So that's option. That's probably the easiest way, right? I mean, that's where you have to do the least amount of work. It's ready-made. You just have to persuade you have to like the super. There's a whole separate conversation about, is the PhD right for you? But that's one way to find one. But you might just have to then be flexible that the topic you cover might not be exactly of your interest. The other way is, of course, and I know some people will be doing this. I know somebody on the panel now who's watching, self-funding. And self-funding essentially means you have to pay for everything. Well, you've got to do several things. You've got to find somebody to supervise you, who it means that you can probably research whatever you like. You can come up with your own topic, providing you can find 1, 2, or more supervisors that are interested in that and are willing to then provide supervision on that area. But you do have to pay your tuition fees, and they are somewhere between £3,000 and £6,000 a year, or is it per term? Per year, isn't it?
I wonder if it's a bit more than that, and perhaps it's institution based. I think you're looking at maybe 9,000.
Oh, well, the latest guidance, the UKRI guidance I said that the average is £4,712 per year. But you're right. In my head, I had £15,000.
Yeah, so I think it may be dependent on institutions, so it'd be worth looking into.
Okay, maybe this is also old information, but you will essentially have to, depending on by institution, you'll have to pay your tuition fees, and of course you have to cover cost of living while you're there. You've got to pay for your way, and of course you can halve it if you decide to do that over a longer period. Your tuition fees are halved if you go part-time, but you do have to find the funding to do that, and of course it means you can take a much longer time to do it, assuming your supervisor's okay with that. There are other ways as well. Oh, there you go. 2,100 per academic year, somebody's just said. So my average of 4,712 is probably... Oh, wait, is that part-time though, John? Sorry, I'm communicating now. For anybody who's watching this on catch-up, I'm communicating with somebody who's in the audience who's self-funding their PhD. But you can self-fund. That's another way. It gives you more control over the project. You do have to find a supervisor. Finding a supervisor, I think a good way to do that is to look at published papers and see who's publishing papers on the topic that you're interested in. And quite often on their official webpage, on their university websites, they'll say whether they're accepting students or not. But you can also reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in this. Would you be willing to be my supervisor? Other ways, of course, funding bodies will advertise for you to apply for PhD funding yourself. If you're a clinical person, the NIHR has doctoral training programs. They're particularly popular. So it allows you to do a PhD either part-time or full-time alongside your clinical work as well. Other charities also advertise PhD funding opportunities. So that's different ways to go about finding the funding if you're a mature student or if you're planning to do this as something alongside your work. Is there any other ways that do you think I've missed there?
I can't think of any other ways you've missed, but I know some universities have grants for not necessarily mature students, but students who may not have the ability to fund themselves almost. So there are ways of getting into doing a PhD if you may not necessarily have the resource to self-fund, in addition to the other funding methods. But again, it does put the onus on the individual to do that a lot more than, say, myself and Ellice, who did studentships.
Yeah. And I think because these costs... Oh, sorry, Ellice, go ahead.
The professional doctorates for health professionals is another route.
Oh, of course, not necessarily clinical. So, I mean, there are ways to go about this that might actually, cost out your own money. I think the easiest way is to look for ready-made. Dementia Researcher website, we do advertise all the PhD opportunities that we can find in dementia. I won't claim that we list them all, and we certainly don't get the ones overseas particularly so much, but there's findaphd.com who clear those universally. And if you're interested in Alzheimer's particularly, the vascular dementia PhDs, which are fundamental science, all close on the 20th of December. And I think the care-related ones are mid-January, 20th of January, I want to say, and the Lewy body ones are being spread out over the next few months. But also, I mean, the other charities, Alzheimer's Research UK, also advertise those as well. Okay. That's enough. That's one question handle. Let's go to Ellice and hear from Ellice now, and you can give your talk. So that explains yours, John. Your fees are about half price because I'm guessing you're part-time. Okay, go ahead, Ellice. Do you want to share your screen?
I'm not yet. No. Oh gosh, that's terrible. Let's try again.
Move it to the other screen.
Let's try again. Hurrah. Okay, perfect. Are you able to see that? Okay, fabulous.
We can, yeah.
So thank you very much for having me. So I'm Ellice Parkinson. I'm a senior advisor in the evaluation team at Health Innovation East, and I joined in March of this year in my 4th writing up year of my PhD actually, and I'm also an associate tutor at the University of East Anglia, so I can keep my academic links also. So I share some similarities with what James said in his presentation, but I also wanted to give a different slightly different lens to my talk. So what did I think of when I thought of a PhD student? Well, it wasn't this. So when I did my undergraduate studies for psychology, I began in 2009. And I remember still in my head, I can remember the 2 mature students in the lecture halls. And so when I was considering doing a PhD, I saw it as a fully funded PhD on phd.com and the UEA website. And I remembered those 2 people and I just thought, oh my gosh, I just don't want to be seen as that mature student. I think the term PhD student is unhelpful. I think it can be a barrier for perhaps people at a later stage in their life. Coming into postgraduate studies later in life. So throughout my PhD, I referred to myself as a PhD researcher because essentially that's what we are. We're researchers and we're completing a PhD at the same time. When I began my PhD, I didn't tell my supervisors that I had young children. At the time, as you can see, I had a baby. My baby was 8 months old. And I had a toddler also. And I chose not to tell my supervisors because I very much felt the stigma, undeservedly so actually, because my supervisors were amazing, but I very much felt the stigma of the judgment that I wouldn't be able to complete a PhD because I had young children and that's too much to juggle perhaps. And that was my own assumptions, I should say. During my induction, so I also joined in COVID, and during my induction, I remember a 3rd or 4th year student talking and saying that she had a baby. So she'd had a baby since doing her PhD and she was finishing up her PhD. And she was my inspiration because I was very quiet, obviously, about my own children, but I just, oh my gosh, to see someone at the end of the line who has been able to get to that point, I know that I can do it. So that was really nice for me to know straight away that actually this was possible for me. Okay, so what was my lens? So again, this is from my perspective. This is certainly not to generalize for anyone else. It was just my experience, and some people may be able to relate and others may not be able to relate. So as I've mentioned already, it was during the COVID pandemic. So I began my PhD in 2020. That meant that when I started, lockdown was kind of, it had slightly lifted that summer, but then we went back into a lockdown soon after. I was a lone parent of 2 children. I was going through a very messy divorce at the time that actually went on for 2 years of my PhD. And I just very recently relocated to Norfolk only months before my PhD. So I was quite isolated. I didn't know people and my life was a little bit chaotic at the time. So one thing about being quite an isolated PhD researcher during COVID is how are you going to meet others? How are you going to get through this journey? And as you can see on this picture, they are lots of happy smiling faces. I've just given people some kind of anonymity there. My supervisors told me straight away, contact people who were on the same induction as you. So I reached out to different people, and some of those people I continued to have some kind of connection with throughout the PhD, others I lost connection, and some of those people I've remained friends with all the way through. Some of those people here on this picture I've remained friends with since, and it's just been amazing to be able to share a journey with others. I supported running the Early Career Researcher Club in the School of Health Sciences. I attended, first of all, for the first few years, and then supported with it in my last year. And that was great for meeting like-minded people, a lot of those people were actually classed as mature students. The first project that I had to do, the first study I had to do, was a systematic review, and it was quite a big systematic review. And again, my supervisor said, go and find reviewers. And so I reached out to different people who had just begun their PhDs and asked if they would like to be reviewers on my systematic review. And a few of them did, and again, have stayed in close contact with those since, and they supported me. So that was another really great way for me to meet other PhD researchers. I should also mention that each institution probably has a support group for mature students. I found this out perhaps in my second year, maybe third year. That wasn't something that I felt like I needed. So there was one for mature students and one with a support group for people with caring responsibilities. It's not something I felt I needed or wanted to access, but just to make people aware that actually most institutions will have support services for people in different situations. And another great way that I felt connected with people in my PhD was dissemination events, networking, conferences, and meeting people at different institutions across different networks. And that's been great for me. So some people may be able to relate to this. So I don't know how you juggle everything. It's something I've heard so many times through my PhD. And I guess it comes back to some of the things that James was saying. For me, it really worked. So actually what felt like quite a dysfunctional setup that I had at the beginning worked really nicely for me, in that I had structured days to manage my workload. So my children were in childcare full time, something I felt very guilty about, but that was my situation. And so I knew that that was my kind of precious time to optimize for doing the PhD, and then I would get them home, do their tea, do whatever they needed. And they went to bed reasonably early because they were still so little. And then when they went to bed, I would continue working. Again, it came back to the context of COVID, in that no one was going out, so I had no FOMO. I wasn't missing out on anything else. And so the PhD kept me going. Also coming back to kind of my divorce situation, there was a lot of negative things going on at the time, and the PhD gave me that really positive light and something really positive to focus on and work towards. So what did I bring to the PhD? What do I think as a mature student I brought to the PhD? So I was an NHS research fellow for several years before beginning the PhD. That was my background. I was actually on maternity leave before starting the PhD. And I've been a support worker in NHS, learning disabilities and mental health as well. So I had some kind of clinical experiences there. Time management skills, I think later in life, perhaps from work, but also as being a mum, you project manage quite a lot. And so I was very good at managing my own time and being quite disciplined about that. I'm a really hard worker, I think perhaps more so since going through the process of divorce. It made me want to just work that little bit harder, and having a give anything a go attitude. I don't say no to many things, which is sometimes a fault of mine, but I quite like to give most things a go and challenge myself. And also my children were my constant motivation. So actually that was a real benefit for me. And then what did the PhD give me? So it gave me confidence. It gave me a positive focus, learning and personal growth, enormous amounts. I've learned so much through the PhD. Same as James, I've had a really positive PhD experience. I had an amazing supervisory team. A community of people who believed in me, gave me the ability to think critically. I had working opportunities, so I could try out if I wanted to go into lecturing or try different research fields. And I massively developed my CV from all the opportunities. I will stop sharing there.
Thank you, Ellice. That was really good, and congratulations again on getting through your Viva just a few weeks ago, which is a mean feat. So I'm interested, going to ask you both this question. Because I was trying to think back. I mean, I know a lot of people might do their PhD who have come straight from undergrad, maybe done a master's, and then go straight into it. And there are definitely some advantages to doing that because, you know, you're kind of in that headspace of studying and things, aren't you? But I think there are also some advantages to coming to this as a mature student. What do you think are those advantages, Ellice? How would you better as doing your PhD at this time of life as opposed to 10 years ago when you were in your 20s?
I think you have more energy. So I think there's the work experience element, but also I did my master's 2 years directly after. So I did it part-time whilst working full-time after my undergrad studies. And I knew by 2014, I was done. I did not want to do studying for a long, long time. And I didn't intend to do my PhD at the time of my life that I did. It was just so that my life circumstances went their way. But I think it was a good time for me, actually. Yeah. The break from studies helped.
Well, have you got any thoughts on that, James?
Yeah, I think it kind of helps to focus your mind. I left my undergrad and worked for 2 or 3 years doing data work with the intent of saving up. And I went to Australia to do a research master's in child cognitive psychology, which I absolutely hated. And so I came back and worked for 10 to 12 years and thought, I really want to do research, but I don't know what topic I want to do. And then through my master's, which was funded by my employer at the time, which was another lucky stroke of luck for me, I kind of did end-of-life care with formal care as their experiences of it. And that kind of spurred me on to do more around older people's health, the impact of informal carers and that kind of work. So it kind of, over that time, I've almost focused the idea of what research I wanted to do. So I think it can help to focus like where you want to look at, what you want to do. And I think it gives you a better idea of, yeah, the career path you want to go on rather than just throwing yourself into the first thing.
I can completely understand that. I think in trying to understand what, I mean, anybody who's watching this, I'm guessing probably thinks it's a nice idea to do, and I'm always interested in what people's motivations are for why you'd want to do a PhD. And I think quite often it's because I know certainly, you know, working around people who have, I know a lot of people who work with a lot of people who've got doctor before their name and go, oh, well, I don't feel adequately qualified, so maybe I should because everybody else has got one. But I think all too often it's that personal fulfillment, isn't it? That intellectual challenge. And you are going to, I mean, the clinical people I've spoken to do come away and say, even if you don't carry on in academia, that the skills you learn through that PhD are useful in life and in work. I mean, Ellice, you've gone on to do a job. You're not in academia anymore, are you? Is it kind of semi-academic?
Well, I guess so. With evaluation, yes. So I kind of have escaped academia, and it's actually it works really well for me. So as I mentioned, I still have a toe in academia, so I can still do my publications and work with the academics that I've built relationships with. But at Health Innovation East, I work in the evaluation team. So we're working with evidence that's already out there, evidence-based practice, which is already implemented, or our teams support the implementation of innovations or innovative practice. And we're then on the final end of that evaluating it. So I feel in a really fortunate position that I get to kind of do the knowledge mobilization stuff. I get to do the research, and then I get to do the evaluation. So I feel like I'm being a bit greedy and having all of it, but it works really lovely.
That's brilliant. And again, I mean, those things you do learn, your ability to learn and evaluate, process data, present that in a certain way, all these skills you learn in your PhD, you can apply to your job. So even if you're thinking about doing this part-time alongside your job, because we're keen on you being in dementia research, but whatever it is, you can apply that. And I know some people who've used the PhD as an opportunity to switch fields as well, because there was something, I don't know, because James, you were working in child stuff. Where did you come to dementia?
So I was working in public health, and that was kind of I was lead analyst for older people's health, dementia, cancer, a few bits and pieces. And I got more interested. I was involved in local groups in the area I worked. And I saw the PhD advertised and thought, oh, that feels like a bit of me. It was quite data heavy. It was in a subject and a field I really wanted to get involved in. It was at the university that's 2 miles from my house. So there was a lot of factors that kind of played into it, but it was that, oh, this is a subject I can really get my teeth into, something that fits me, as well as me being able to give some benefit from it as well.
And you both did yours full time as well.
Yeah.
As well. How was that transition from, I mean, day one, you've got it. Day one, you sat there in front of a computer going, oh my God, back to school. How did you mentally deal with that? Go on, James.
It was quite different, but like employment and PhD felt very different. Like I was used to like every day going in, not necessarily doing the same thing, but it was a churning of work that needed to get done in order for the organization to function. Whereas the first few months of my PhD, we didn't have any data yet. So I think we were a bit scrabbling around trying to find something for me to do. And we came across a systematic review and started doing that, and it got published. So it wasn't all terrible. It was just quite a bit, oh, this is a bit slower than I imagined. I expected to be at it from the first day, but yeah, it was different.
Was that the same for you, Ellice?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I didn't really know what a PhD was. So I knew I always wanted to do a doctorate or study at doctoral level, but I didn't really know what a PhD was. I didn't know anyone else who had done PhDs. And so then when I started at the university, not having a timetable and which is why I find the student kind of term unhelpful, because you think you're going to be attending classes and you don't. And yes, so for the first few, I think October to December, I was developing my systematic review protocol. So it was a lot of reading, a lot about hydration, just a deep dive into what is dehydration and drinking behaviours, really. So yeah, a lot of learning, reading up on the subject initially, and I did a systematic review to start off with, which really does throw you in the deep end of learning about your subject.
I guess it's quite tricky, isn't it? I mean, particularly with your gym, where you're used to going in and doing a 9 to 5, and you clearly know what you've got to do. And then even if you kind of broadly, when you have that first meeting with your supervisor, and rather than saying what you've got to do every day, the conversation is of, this is where we want to be in 3 months' time. But without clearly saying, and this is what you'll have to do next week, and the week after, and the week after. And you've got to work it out. With guidance, of course.
Yeah, that was something that it did take a bit of adjustment. That first little while, thinking, oh, this is kind of on me to set my own targets and goals here, and what objectives I need to put within those wider aims, in essence. And it was, I suppose, coming from a work environment, though, I did have the skills to do that. I just wasn't expecting to have to do that so quickly, and I suppose that's an oversight on my part, but you do get used to it. It's just a different, there's two paces, I think, to doing a PhD: very slowly or very quickly. And I think you kind of transition between the two very quickly as well, depending on what time of year it is and what kind of work needs doing. So yeah.
And I guess that's where those feelings that slightly of, if you're not the kind of person that's who can live with uncertainty, and if you like to kind of know what you're doing all the time, and that's not to say you don't need that as a PhD, but I can understand that there's, you embracing that rather than suddenly feeling a bit inadequate or like you're not keeping up or you're not doing enough. That's where your supervisor can be so important to give you that reassurance that you are doing okay. And were your supervisors good like that? Of course, you might not want to say.
No, I mean, mine were amazing. And actually, I had the same 3 supervisors the whole way through, which is often unheard of. I was really lucky. I remember learning very early on, and the supervisor saying at one of our first meetings, you need to manage us. And when you think of the supervisory relationship, you think that your supervisors, like you say, are going to give that top-down advice, and that's not going to happen. So it's very early on taking autonomy for your PhD research. You're going to come with the agenda. You're going to do the learning and tell them what you've found, and then there'll be a discussion around it. So you need to be motivated. You need to want to do it. You need to be interested in your topic. I think someone has written in the chat about how it compares to your 9 to 5. And I obviously came from a research career. So for me, there was a lot. I didn't have that real jump into the research world. I was quite lucky in that respect. But it is different because you're learning a new field in a new institution with new people. So it's like starting fresh somewhere again.
But I don't know about you, I find that quite exciting. Suddenly kind of being given the challenge of doing something new, I find quite exciting, because we don't often get that in our day jobs, do we? I mean, if particularly depending on what kind of job you do, you do the same stuff. Whereas this is, I quite like that. James is nodding. Did you have anything to add to that, Jim?
Yeah, I was lucky in that I had 4 great supervisors as well. One left after the first year for reasons that are entirely understandable, but I had a really good supervisory team, one of whom is now my manager and has been for the last 3 years, Clarissa, who you'll know, Adam. And I also had a clinician involved in older people's care, and I had someone based in geography who was more data heavy. And it was, like Ellice said, it was, here's your topic. You bring something to us, we'll discuss it, but you're in control of this. You are the expert in this field. You tell us what you need from us, and we'll give you feedback. So it was really practical, and it was enjoyable. It was enjoyable being in charge of your own subject.
I'm glad you both had that experience. I have heard of people, the more supervisors you have, the harder it can become as well, because you can get conflicting advice. You've got to keep different people happy. Some are available, some are not around, and it can get complicated, I think, the more you have. But it's great that you had that experience. I remember talking to somebody a couple of years ago as well that found that their supervisor was younger than they were, and that seemed to create a slightly weird dynamic between the two of them, where the younger supervisor seemed to assume you had a level of knowledge because you were older, because you'd got this life experience. They assumed a lot more. So I think the person I remember talking to always felt like they were more helpful to their other students who were younger than they were left to get on with it a lot more and felt a little bit at sea. I don't know if...
I think that, not in that sense, but all of my supervisors, bar the clinician, were younger than me. And it's an awkward feeling if you think on it too much. But again, I had a really affable, very pragmatic and helpful supervisory team. And I know people who had supervisors who were younger than them who may not have been as helpful to them as they may have been to their other students, just because there is a level of assumed knowledge, especially someone to come from employment, whether it's research or otherwise. There is a level of that.
I mean, these things happen. We all can end up with a boss that's younger than you. That's just how it is, isn't it? But it's slightly weird when it's that student teacher. Let's pick up a couple of these questions in the chat, and then I'm going to get to the ones here, which is, can you ask how much more difficult you would say it was doing a PhD as opposed to the 9 to 5? Was it harder or was it just different?
Mine was just different. I just love my PhD. It's difficult. It's different. It's a different. I don't think you can compare a PhD to anything else, and it's quite difficult to explain what that looks like. I think early on, as James said, it's a bit slower, but there are things to do. So there's professional and personal development to do. There are some compulsory trainings you may have to do. At our institution, UEA, you're able to pick up master's modules for additional training. So I did all of those things, but you're planning your research at the same time, and then come to your second year, or even like halfway through your first year, you're in data collection. So whether that's for systematic review or another qualitative or quantitative project, you're in data collection. So actually, most of the time, you're really busy. That worked for me. I like being busy.
I should qualify this. Of course, both of you are qualitative kind of. You're not in fundamental science, and so it's hard for us to say whether that's different. I think it might be slightly, if you have not been a fundamental scientist, suddenly deciding you're going to do a PhD in a fundamental science based on your chemistry degree from 20 years ago is probably, I'm guessing, I think you're going to find that harder to do that. I know a lot of people in that space who've then upgraded. They've done their previous qualifications, been a research assistant in a lab and built their relationship in that lab, and then gone on to do a PhD in that lab. And I think, quite honestly, if you're in that space and you're a little bit older, that's probably the way to go, is to try and get into a lab working first and then move to a PhD. You can't just suddenly decide I'm going to do a PhD in molecular, science or in genetics or something. Let's ask that. So this next question is, how often did you meet with supervisors?
For me, it kind of depended. I would have a meeting in the calendar once a month with kind of my supervisory team. But then, like, my primary supervisor, I'd see quite a lot. We were in the same building, or I'd knock on their office or email and say, "Are you okay for a chat?" During COVID, they lived round the corner from my house. So when restrictions were lifted, we walked around the local park and had a chat. It depends on how busy you are and which stage of your PhD you were at. But having something in your calendar specifically to say, we are meeting, gives everyone like a kick up the backside, to be honest, to say this is still ongoing, we need to keep in touch.
What about you, Ellice?
Yeah, very similar, apart from my supervisor doesn't live around the corner. So we used to meet monthly, online mostly, actually. I think I had a handful of meetings in person, but because of COVID, it went remote, and actually that worked out better for the four of us to meet. Once a month, university, the UEA, we have to submit electronic records that we've done that. But then there were times throughout, so qualitative data collection, times when I found it more difficult through the PhD, I requested more frequent supervision, or whatever their field specific was. So systematic reviewing, when it came to analysis, I would perhaps meet with that supervisor more often. So it's very flexible and tailored. But I would say is my final writing up year, I didn't have as much supervision. One, because it was juggling a full-time job and thesis writing and everything else. And that was a bit more difficult, which in hindsight is probably when I needed more support, because I found the writing really difficult.
I think it really depends on the circumstance of your PhD. I know quite a few research projects which there's a whole kind of team. There's two postdocs working on something else. There's a whole group of people working on something. There might be 2 or 3 PhD students all working on slightly different areas, but within a team where there are also postdocs, and so the postdocs will also be involved in chatting to you, providing guidance. You might all work in the same building, or even be desks next to each other. So obviously that's a little bit closer. The new Alzheimer's Society Doctoral Training Centres, part of their reason for taking that DTC approach is that people hopefully are slightly less isolated, that when they appoint people, they appoint as a cohort. So you're not on your own. Whilst you might not be all at the same institution, you might be one of five people who are all starting at the same time, all in the same program, and they'll work with you as a cohort to try and deal with some of those problems of isolation. But there's no doubt, particularly if you're in the self-funded route, that I imagine you've got to be somebody who can be quite self-motivated. You've got to be able to work on your own and build up that sense of confidence, if you like, that you know what you're going to do. If you've got to do something, you approach people, and if you maybe making sure that your supervisor is going to lend themselves to your way of working, which is easier doing if you're picking one. If you're going for a ready-made project, of course, I suppose that's where it comes into, don't just take the first one that comes along. That, just because you're offered it, if you don't feel like the supervisor's right, that's not going to work. Because from what you've both said, it's really important that you've got a passion for the topic that you're researching, or at least interested, not just doing it because hey, it's a PhD and I'm getting funded to do it. Would you agree? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me get to my other question. So this is slightly longer. I'm going to read out the whole thing. So this person, unfortunately, I don't feel guilty at all about this person, because they unfortunately couldn't be here today because they're on the way to the Canary Islands for Christmas. So, boo! I hope it's. I feel bad. 77 years old next month. Completed a master's in dementia at the University of Hull 15 months ago, and now considering a PhD. First of all, good for you. I mean, that's incredible to have that sense of drive to be able to do that. Since completing my master's, I've meticulously kept daily health statistics and dreams content. Occasionally my dreams indicate personality traits which I thought was something consciously aware of without taking remedial action that might be beneficial to my well-being. Over the last few months I've been researching psychology to assisting helping me understand my mind's workings. Unsurprisingly, I've become particularly interested in how people towards the end of their lives confront their perceived skeletons which they have successfully or not lived with for many years. Could such a subject, using myself as a case study, be developed enough to obtain an acceptable PhD? Do you think, what's your view? So I think the idea here of how you deal with certain problems at end of life, I mean, you can imagine it, can't you? I can imagine now grandparents having big family secrets, or the knowledge that's not being shared in life, how do you cope with that? I find that as a really fascinating subject. I think that's PhD worthy, but I don't know, what do you think?
As with any research project, I would encourage someone to do a literature search first. So see what literature is already out there, see what the field looks like and whether there's a gap. So ultimately, any PhD is supposed to have novel findings. So making sure that there is a gap there. But I would also say I absolutely encourage anyone at any age to do a PhD, especially if they are as passionate about a topic and have like a fantastic idea for something. It's just trying to find that niche. And yeah,
I think it's an amazing topic. It's finding what method would fit with it, which is something, I suppose, speaking to academics, not me, because I haven't got a clue, but I'm sure there are people out there who would know what methods would fit this, because it kind of sounds like a self-reflective case study ethnography or some variation of that, but it sounds really interesting. I'd love to read about it.
I completely agree. I mean, end of life research has certainly become higher profile in the last. I mean, but that tends to be on the kind of medical side, I like the idea of how you prepare yourself for end of life in that way, and how you might deal with families. I mean, you can see how that can be broadened out to family stories and family histories and storytelling and sharing information and news. I love it. If the student, do you remember the student? There's been a big news story in the last few months on social media, particularly about the student from Cambridge whose PhD was titled Olfactory Ethics, the Politics of Smell in Modern and Contemporary Prose. And they were criticized, saying, what the heck is this? How is that a PhD? Honestly, I think if you're finding it interesting and there's people out there, I think, and you can find a supervisor and fund it, then I think that's a great topic. But what do I know? I can't decide. I think Ellice had very practical advice. Do a literature review. See what's already out there on that topic, if anything. That's a great place to start. We're coming up to the last few minutes now. If you've got any final questions, do pop them in the chat. We kept the chat going rather than going to discussion. There aren't many people here tonight, but I know lots more people will be attending online. Let me pick up on some of these last questions I pre-prepared. Common challenges for mature students to overcome. I'm guessing life for you, Ellice, from the challenges you've faced. I mean, incredible that you managed to get through all. But they say if you want something done, ask a busy person, right?
It was definitely a motivator. Like I said, for me, the PhD was the positive bit. So I just threw all my energy into the positive stuff. But yeah, challenges. There's lots of challenges that you navigate in life: house moves, children, finances, other staff, bereavements. There's lots of challenges, isn't there?
Have you got a top tip for managing time effectively? Are you like, do you get up at 5 a.m. or are you one of those kind of list people?
Yeah, lists. And when the children go to bed, that's when I tend to do work. So I'll have my day work, sort the kids between a certain time, they go to bed, then I crack on with publications or thesis, or yeah. So I split my time up that way and get a little sleep.
Do have a social life in there as well.
No social life and no sleep.
Because we haven't talked much about well-being and things like that, but of course we know that's important. But it is in my final. I wrote down a list of what I from my own research, I wrote down a list of what we thought were 10 top takeaways. But James, what do you think?
I do like writing lists, and I like to write at the very top of the list something I know I can do in 5 minutes, which starts me on a good roll of knowing that I've done something in that day, but not putting too much pressure on yourself to do everything all at once. Like there will be peaks and troughs of having motivation and then maybe not having as much motivation, and because you're reliant on yourself more than anyone else, it's being aware that I don't have to do it all now. I can spread this out a bit more than I currently am.
Absolutely. I do this. I don't know if you've seen this approach. I used to do this thing, particularly where you do the kind of 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, as into what can I achieve in this period of time, and breaking down that way I was finding useful. So this is the list I came up with. So this is our final top 10 things to think about. This is top 10 tips and valuable takeaways. So leverage your experience, use your prior work and life experiences to enrich your research perspective and approach. These unique insights can provide a fresh angle to your academic work. So whether that's funding yourself, finding something you've done before, if you can bring your own life experience to that, it's going to be interesting for you and you're going to be able to contribute brilliantly. Number 2, establish a support network. Build a network of peers, mentors, advisors who understand your journey and can provide guidance and support throughout. Don't undervalue the importance of connecting with other mature students through the groups around you, like Ellice said. And don't just rely upon supervisors. We talked a lot about supervisors, but mentors, postdocs, colleagues, other people working in your field, build that whole little support network around yourself. Set clear goals is number 3. Define what you want to achieve with your PhD, both academically and professionally, and setting clear, measurable goals might help you stay focused and motivated, and you can work with those with your supervisor. Number 4 is develop a routine. I think particularly if you've come from a very structured job before, or if you've got a very busy life, structured routine with balance is key to make sure that you accommodate your studies, family life, personal time, to help you manage that stress and feel like you're being productive. I think it can be bad if you kind of get to the end of the week and feel like, oh, I had a bad PhD week this week. Or staying organized, keeping track of deadlines, meetings, commitments, using those tools, the digital tools we all know we have access to. Prioritizing self-care is number 6. Remember that your health and well-being are paramount, no matter how old you are, whether you're in your 20s or you're in your 50s or you're in your 70s. Making sure you prioritize that is important. Be open to learning and embracing that student mindset. So become a sponge for new information. I can lose myself for a day in YouTube just looking at research methodologies. Or the National Centre for Research Methods, I find is the most incredible resource for looking at different methodologies that you get new ideas for. Seek financial assistance, so explore scholarships, grants, funding opportunities. There are loans available for mature students as well, which you can get your hands on. You can also access university resources, so the libraries, counselling services, careers advice will all be available from the university if you sign up to do a PhD there. And plan early. If you're doing this not so late, plan early post-PhD. So, you know, start to think about why you're doing this and what comes next. They were our top 10 takeaways. Thank you so much for joining us. It's 9 p.m. in the UK right now, and this is our very last webinar sat in the salon before Christmas. I'd like to thank my brilliant guests, Dr. James Watson and Ellice. Let's call you Doctor. It's nearly, right? It's Parkinson. And if you want to know more about James's literature review, he did a webinar for us during the pandemic, which is available on our YouTube channel, talking about your systematic review.
I did.
Systematic review.
Feels like a long time ago.
Brilliant work on hydration research as well as part of the our podcast on a couple of occasions. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Have a wonderful evening and do it. Go do a PhD. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.